Check.
Okay. So here we are, and I have Katrina on chat.
Headphones have been found. Let's see if this works.
Good.
I think this is right. They were all the way down in my car. Sorry about that.
Mm-hmm.
All right, can you hear us?
I think it'll take a second for Tina to get everything set up.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Did you all try the link that I sent for? Oh, there we go.
Yep. There we are. Now we're in business.
Oh,
okay.
Sorry about
very
that.
good. Okay. So first of all, I want to make sure that our audience can see us. Did anybody other than Melina check the link that I asked you to share?
I did not check that. No.
Okay, because I have some concerns about that link working, and I don't want the audience to lose out. Hold on a second. Yeah, one sec. Okay, while I finish this, we could quickly do introductions. So starting from the left to the right, Tina, hello.
Hello.
If you could introduce yourself and to let the other speakers know a little bit about you.
Sure. I'm Tina Baily. I live in the Mountain States. I have 5 children, and the youngest 2 are both transgender. The daughter is 22. Her name is Kat, and the younger one is a boy. His name is William. And they both came out in 2015. So we've had some time to adjust.
Mm-hmm.
My husband is very supportive, and the siblings are as well.
And you have 5 children altogether, right?
Yes.
Busy house.
Indeed.
Okay, and then we have Janna.
Hi, I'm Janna Barkin, and I live in California. And I have 3 kids. One is my stepson who lives up in Oregon with his family. And then I have my cisgender, meaning same gender, cisgender daughter who's 25, and my transgender son who's almost 20. He came out gradually over his whole life up until this point, but his main transition time where he changed pronouns and did some medical adjustments was when he was 14, 15, and 16. And so, again, we've had quite a long time to adjust. I'm happy to be here.
Wonderful. And then we have Melina.
Hello, I'm Melina. I'm in Florida, all wonderful, sunny Florida. I have 2 cisgender kids of my own, 1 cisgender stepkid and 1 transgender stepson.
And you have the distinction of being a transparent as well.
I am trans myself, and actually so is my partner. So
we have an interesting mix in the room. This is very good.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
A little cocktail of trans and cis. All right. I don't have a very clear format for this. I just figured that we would all talk about our experiences and that questions would come up that we could address together. And some questions might come up from the audience. As I conducted other panels a little bit earlier in the summit, I noticed that our job is basically to do 3 things at the same time. One is to keep, it's kind of like juggling or walking and chewing gum. So one of them is to keep the main thread of the conversation going. If you started a point, to try to remember and to finish it. The other one is the conversation is going to popcorn around a little bit because we have several panelists. And then the third is the fact that there might be questions from the audience as people tune in through the chat and through the YouTube channel, because this is live. So we're going to try to juggle all those different priorities together. The first question that I'd like to ask each of you is, as you became aware of the fact that your kid is trans, what were your key concerns or your key main reactions? And let's start with Tina.
My biggest concern when my son came out to us was, how are people going to accept him and look at him? What are his challenges going to be as far as the public views him? Are they going to hate him? Is he going to be what are his challenges going to be? Is anyone going to love him? So far, he's doing all right. Now, my daughter.
Go ahead.
Oh, I'm so sorry. My daughter, I worry about her safety. That is my biggest concern for her, that she not encounter violence, physical violence.
Very good point. And Melina, for you, it was a little bit different because your stepkid came to you already trans.
Yes, he did. I got involved after the fact. So my concern has primarily been on the social side as well, dealing with, potential bullying factors in his school, and otherwise his mental health. But yeah, I didn't have the opportunity to be there from the beginning.
Now, it occurs to me that we have here a very supportive crowd. That's a supportive crowd that's on board. It occurs to me that there are some other concerns that parents might experience, parents who might be more resistant to the fact that their kid is trans. And something that I found really sweet is the fact that all the concerns that you voiced were kid-centered. I've seen some parents express concerns when the kid starts coming out, whether coming out as gay, coming out as a lesbian, or coming out as trans, or bi. I'm sorry, I didn't want to leave somebody out. That they would express concerns which are very me-centric, not so much about the kid. Like, what will the neighbors think? What will the family think of my parenting? And also, will I lose any status with my co-workers or with my friends or something like that? And that's a strong concern for some parents. Another concern that I've seen come up is, and potentially this could be the next topic, which is the fact that some parents have a really gendered type of a love for their kids, a very gender-centric kind of a bond with their kids. Like the father relating to the kid only in terms of football and baseball and cars and trucks and, I don't know, pissing contests and spitting contests. Or the mom just focusing entirely on what's the wedding dress going to be like, and can I braid her hair, and what kind of dolls I'm going to buy. I've seen some parent experiences that are very centered around gender, and because of that, it can be really, really disturbing to them to find out that they didn't quite get what they thought they had in the box.
That's funny.
Well, have you guys had any conversations with parents along that line?
For me, I think that is a really common experience, especially among the men that I've had conversation with that have trans daughters, especially that it seems that women, though we do have a lot of gender roles put upon us, obviously men have a lot more restriction around their gender expression. I really believe a woman can be strong and a woman can cry, but a man really isn't supposed to cry at all. And I think having a an adjustment to thinking of your boy then as a girl. It seems like a lot of men who are more traditional style people do really struggle. So I think it would be a really wonderful thing to see more exploration of what are we doing as a society around gender in schools, and how are we actually approaching gender, not just for transgender or bigender or gender nonconforming kids, but for everybody, because we all have some relation to gender, whether we have a gender or we don't, it's still a relationship to it, right? So that's what I've been thinking about a lot, about parenting and gender. Even though I'm parent to a transgender child, I'm also parent to a cisgender child, etc. So
I like that because we tend to define our kids so much by their gender, and they should just be defined as individuals.
yeah,
McDonald's with their, would you like a boy toy or a girl toy?
right. Yes.
That brings up something that I would like to mention.
Yeah, go ahead.
It's trans related. I have the gift of 4 wonderful little grandchildren. The second one is a 5-year-old girl, and she's very girly, and she had some struggles when my youngest Will came out, because she came into our family as a step grandchild and saw him at first as a girl and watched this transition. And every time she'd see him, he had a deeper voice and more hair on his face. And it's really opened her eyes as to, is this a boy or a girl? Is this a boy or a girl? And she's very, very adamant that things have to be boy or girl. The grandmother, the opportunity to introduce the idea that, hey, boys can wear pink. Hey, boys can have earrings too, just like girls. Boys can do. It's my little sneaky plan to change this little one.
I remember my daughter went, both kids actually, but specifically my daughter went through a tremendously rigid stage. And my daughter is cis. I have, she's now 11. When I started transitioning, she was 6. And there's 2 things I remember. One thing is that there was a pink cup, and my daughter would only drink from the pink cup. I think it was a little Princess Ariel cup, a Little Mermaid. And my son would refuse to touch it. He would not touch it. He would not pass her the pink cup because it was radioactively girly. And so I remember, and this is kind of the reverse experience. It's the experience of a trans parent with cis children. But when I first started having really early conversations about that with my kids, and I think we're going back to 2011 maybe, I was in the car and my son was in the passenger seat and my daughter was in the back, and I was committing a sin at the time pretty often, which is because of the fact that my son was next to me, I would kind of sort of forget that Emma can be part of the conversation, and she's sitting right behind us. To the point that eventually she complained and she demanded equal time on the front seat, which was pretty cool. But I had forgotten, and we were parking the car, and I said, Evan, would you mind if you saw me in girl clothes at some point? And he said, no, of course not. I want you to be happy. I support you. Which is like, oh.
No.
And from the back seat, the 6-year-old went, I would freak out.
No.
I would scream real loud.
Oh. In a good way or a freaky way?
No, in a bad way. She said boys are supposed to wear boys' clothes. Girls are supposed to wear girls' clothes. And she was very adamant. And but she was also really being funny. So we deconstructed it. Of course, we evolved and now we do our makeup together. But But at 6, she was just absolutely obsessed with gender roles. So I think there's like a stage, there's a phase. Yeah. And in a way, I endeavored really hard at breaking that pattern. But at the same time, looking back, I'm thinking maybe it's just a legitimate part of socialization. I would do things like, at one point, I bought a helicopter for him. And so I bought a little helicopter for her. She looked at it with disgust and she said, you got me a boy toy.
Huh.
Yeah.
So then we spent like 40 minutes looking at helicopter pilot females on YouTube to get the point across. But so yeah, there's a specific time when where kids are very attached to gender, and I think they need to define themselves. So Tina, that might be just you'll have to wait it out until they get out of that rigidity stage before they can. But it's really funny how clearly kids go through very specific stages. My daughter she was obsessed with princesses for years, and then she became a communist. And now she's a peasant, and she wants down with the monarchy because she thinks that princesses are full of themselves.
Ah. Wow. That's funny.
Yeah, she's a revolutionary now.
Huh.
But so, have you encountered parents who express concerns to you about their transgender kid, which are clearly driven by their own needs and not by the kid's concerns?
Well, I would.
Oh, go ahead.
Go ahead.
Tina, go ahead. All right, Millie.
Okay.
Yeah.
I can say more from the experience of having been that child. You know, that was definitely something that I would say was probably my parents' experience. You know, they were actively trying to not notice the things, and the indications, as we've talked about elsewhere. But you know, and as a result of it, I ended up being in the closet even to myself for a very long time. And conversely, as a result of my childhood experiences, I was very particular about paying attention to my son in particular, because my daughter's not biologically mine, you know, but she's adopted mine. I've been there from the start. Anyway, and so I knew that he was more likely to take after me in that regards than others might. And so I have always paid attention to see if I could notice any signs, and I haven't. So as far as I'm concerned, he's cisgender. But it was something that I've paid attention to his entire life, just so to make sure that if he did exhibit these similar behaviors to me, that I would not react the way my parents did.
Wow,
That's
this brings up a very important point, which is we seem to live as a society absolutely terrified of the notion of LGBTQIA, absolutely terrified of the fact that one of our kids might end up being one of those dreaded minorities. And so there's all this socialization to prevent it, instead of just kind of leaning into, so what are you? And, you know, what and who are you attracted to, and things like that, as open-ended questions. Because really, odds are your kid is going to be heteronormic as cisgender if you look at society at large. But it would be really good to just account for the possibility, right? I mean, it'd be really good to be open to, like, I especially had conversations with my kid about with my son when he started being 12, 13 years old. I would say, well, you know, the day that you start being interested in girls or boys or both, and just kind of checking the temperature, because I had no idea.
Yeah. I mean, I think that children are always showing us who they are. Like I talk about when I was pregnant, I didn't know the gender of my child. Anytime I was pregnant, I didn't want to know. I wanted to bond with the baby without a gender influence. And so I particularly chose not to know. And there was some uncertainty and some challenges in that. But I really do feel that it gave me that opportunity to be fully present regardless. And I would say that I think I did raise my children knowing that someone might be lesbian, gay, bisexual, or transgender. I don't think I knew Sorry about that. I don't think I knew a lot about it, but I was open to the possibilities.
Yeah, and actually, you brought up an interesting point, which is as you're expecting a child, quite often very heavy expectations are beginning to be built around the subject of gender, right? Uh,
Yes.
there's investment in it, and there's camps, and
Yes.
there's bickering about it sometimes in families.
Absolutely. All too common, right?
I remember my young sister came to the world when I was 7, and my brother was 8.5.
Mm.
And I remember that he took me to the backyard to where the swing set was, and we had a secret meeting to decide her fate.
Oh my
And
goodness.
what I remember we concluded is that if it's a boy, fine, we will put up with him, but we will not share any of our toys. And if it's a girl, we will just throw
Oh
her
my
in the
gosh.
dumpster.
Oh,
That was the
poor
conclusion, and we
thing.
were very satisfied with the policy that was established, and we walked away from that meeting feeling fully accomplished. And then she foiled our plans completely because she was born and she was cute.
Yeah, she's pretty cute. I do. A disclosure, I do know her.
Yes, that was a secret weapon she brought. But so families have expectations about, oh, it's a girl, and so I can imagine if 12 or 15 years later, the kid says, no, actually, I'm not. That could be quite annoying.
I wouldn't say annoying. For me, it was rather a surprise.
Mm-hmm.
I should have seen it coming. In fact, he came to me at 5 or 6 and said, Mom, I feel like I'm a boy, not a girl.
Uh-huh.
But he was the baby with 4 older brothers at the time, so we thought. And we thought it was more an influence, environmental, because there
Mm-hmm.
were no girl cousins. Everybody was boy all around him except for me. And I'm not a girly female. I'm me. I'm a jeans and t-shirt kind of girl. I don't get
Yeah.
my nails done. I don't do facials, things like that. So that's what I thought.
Mm-hmm.
And it was a slow progression, refusal of girl things, all girl things. And then he came out as gay sometime in late elementary school, and it just kept going from there.
Mm-hmm. And actually, it's surprising how often we dismiss what our kids are telling us, and our kids are telling us very, very pointed things very early in life. I remember really like Louis C.K. as a comedian, and he speaks sooth quite often, but sometimes also he's full of it. And so one joke was centered around the premise that his 5-year-old um, brings up a lot of things to him, all of which are a complete waste of his time because they're really immaterial and irrelevant to life. And I think the example that he gave is something like, that dog is brown. And his joke was, yes, that dog is brown, clearly not anything that anybody needs to focus on. But my experience of my daughter as a 5-year-old is that she would constantly say things which were very relevant. She would say things like, here's your credit card, and are you sure that you took your keys? And she had a very good grasp on what was going on around us. So I think we should listen to our kids more. But so you brought up the subject of social approval and the subject of safety, both of which I think are very important to parents in terms of kids of all kinds. If your kid is bad at soccer, or if your kid is socially awkward, or if your kid stutters, or if your kid has Tourette's, or if your kid has bad grades, then immediately the thought of his peers rejecting or her peers rejecting her comes up, and we're concerned about that. We always want to make sure that there's plenty of kids at their birthday party, right?
Well, yeah, that really does remind me of time when my child really didn't have that, didn't have a lot of people come to his birthday party, and it was a little sad. It was just this time where he was kind of in between and kind of awkward, not as much friends with the boys anymore, but only a few girlfriends that felt right. And he is a person who's female to male. And then it was better later. But yeah, I think all parents have worries and expectations for, around our children. And it is hard when we see them in those in-between places being confused or suffering, and we just don't really know what to do. We just want to love our kids and support them, but then we don't always know where to go for that or how to do that.
Yeah. And when we're not well educated on the subject of gender theory or on the subject of orientations and diversity, a parent can blunder really badly by trying to protect the child from behavior that could be perceived as socially awkward or socially unacceptable, not realizing that you're actually stifling their very identity. I specifically remember my father's very clear and very adamant indications, and I'm talking about when I was 7 or when I was 9, about the fact that no sissy behavior was going to be tolerated. And I found that terrifying.
Yeah, I can only imagine. And also having it be named a word that's meant to be kind of a put down, sissy, right? So then not only are you being told a specific gender behavior is not being tolerated, but it's also being charged with a word that's not really meant to be very nice.
He actually did. I don't remember him using that word to me. I grew up. I grew up in South America. The word maricon was something which is sissy or Nancy was very common. Was very common as an insult. I don't remember my father ever using it on me, but I remember one example was the fact that when I was 15, I grew my hair really long, and it was kind of a modality in Argentina. We were going kind of through a post-hippie era, and I had very long hair, and I came down to the kitchen joining everybody at dinner, and I was musing about the fact that this particular shampoo, was not quite as good as the previous one because my hair didn't quite feel as silky as the other one, and that did not go over well. And he ridiculed me and made it very clear that I was not to talk in those terms again. And it felt really unkind. I didn't understand it, but looking back, it just seems like they're trying to protect us. They're trying to.
Yeah.
And unfortunately, the parent ends up being the child's first bully that way.
Yeah, that's something to make sure you never do. You don't want to be your own child's bully.
Yes, exactly. But was it easy for you to fall in step with the fact that, and I'm asking Tina and Janna, was it easy for you to fall into step with the fact that your child was exhibiting a gender behavior which didn't seem concordant with their body, or was it, or did you resist it initially? What was your emotional reaction to that? Did it make you apprehensive?
Considering that I was trying to dress my son, who I thought was a girl at the time, and he was 18 months, stomped his little feet and looked at me with his hands on his hips and said, "I'm not going to wear those rumbly socks." I finally figured out he meant the cute little girly ruffled socks. He absolutely refused. Not a single ruffled sock was allowed on that child's body for the rest of his life. And it progressed from there. Pretty soon it was no more jumpers, no more dresses, no more pink, no more purple. And all I could do was stand back and accept it's only clothes.
Yeah.
True. By the way, we have Katrina joining us on chat, and she's emphasizing the point that lots of trans kids do self-harm because of rejection from family and friends.
Yes.
And sometimes it can be fatal. It could express itself as cutting. It could express itself as substance abuse. It could express itself as um, uh, not eating, and other destructive behaviors because of the
Yes.
fact that, and it's not even a rejection in the sense of like, get out of my house, but just in this kind of rejection of like, people like you are not thought of well.
Well, or even saying it's a phase, or saying, well, I'm trying, but it's hard for me. And it's true that the parents, we all go through our own process, and it's all feelings are important to validate. And at the same time, we don't have to bring those into the space of our children, because they do need our support. And referring to the statistics, it can get very, very real very quickly, where 46% or more of trans people have said that they have attempted suicide, compared to the 4% of the general population. And so many people talk about not being supported as their number one problem by their family, right? And so I have one family in a support group that I facilitate who, he says he's supportive, and yet he can't say the words "I love you" to his daughter. He has a lot of anger, which, again, a valid emotion. However, he's kind of stuck in this place, and he wonders why his child isn't doing well. She's really having a hard time. And we just, we all empathized with him, feeling, supporting him, and also said, what can you bring in that would change this? Help you resolve some of your anger, help her move along so you're not as worried for her. And other dad in the room said, all I know is I love my child no matter what, and I don't want to lose my child. And that really took the other dad aback. And hopefully, I asked him if he would let me know if he called her, and just use the words "I love you," which allows room for anger still, whatever he's feeling. But "I love you" is one of those things that can really help in a lot of
Oh,
situations.
absolutely. I
Yeah.
mean, in general, it's surprising how many parents are reluctant to, and I'm talking about kids in general now, not so
Yeah.
much trans kids, but they're reluctant to hug their kids or to tell the kids, I love you, because they're just not conditioned that way, especially if they're coming from European, Nordic, or Anglo-Saxon, or Germanic tribes. By the way,
Somewhere.
Katrina also says that sometimes kids need support and guidance because they themselves don't know.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
it gets really tough when the kid is asked to prove something, or to affirm something, when the kid themselves are kind of trying to figure themselves out. A couple of things that come to mind, and I'm sorry if I'm going to, of course, base some things based on my own experience. I'm not trying to make the conversation about me, but drawing from my experience, one thing that I remember is having to explain to people that I don't have all the answers. I don't know. A person who's experiencing cancer is not immediately an oncologist.
Ah,
I'm experiencing transition, but that doesn't mean that I'm an endocrinologist and that transition expert. I'm just kind of winging it and taking the pills and doing the best that I can on a day-to-day
sure.
basis. So you can expect a 15-year-old kid not be very competent, a 12-year-old kid, a 7-year-old kid, to not be tremendously competent at being able to explain the nuances of gender identity that they might be experiencing. A friend of mine called herself a girl boy and just stuck to that for many years.
And what Janna said brought back to mind what we experienced as our son hit puberty. We saw that he was biting himself, which progressed to scratching and cutting. He still bears the scars of his self-harm to this day at the age of 19. But all of that was his mind and body just not really working together as the wrong puberty was happening, and he really consciously did not know, and he hated himself, and he couldn't look in the mirror. He told us this after transition: Mom, I couldn't look in the mirror. I didn't want to take a shower with the light on. I couldn't look at myself.
Yeah.
So
it's
wow.
very, very strong feelings, and when you combine that, especially with the already heightened sensitivity of the teenage years, and with the onset of puberty, it can be really explosive. And I want to caution parents listening to this, and this is, I'm taking a page from what Janna said earlier, to be very, very careful of the blasé, dismissive type of supportive mode that you could adopt. And what I mean by that is, I have heard parents say, well, I'm trying my best, it's an adjustment, I forget about pronouns, I'm sorry, I forgot. And without realizing that to the child, this is very significant and very triggering, and it's not a lighthearted manner. I was on the phone today with a person from my school, from my university, and she used the wrong gender twice on me, and I told her the third time, I said, I don't have any animosity against you, but if you use the wrong gender one more time, I am going to have to hang up the phone. And she kind of got it at that point. But the child sometimes is unable to express it because of hierarchy situations where the parent is in a position of authority and a position of guidance and control of the conversation and of the relationship, and so the kid sometimes doesn't have a lot of agency. Like, for example, just in what Tina was saying in terms of deciding not to wear those ruffled socks and deciding not to wear the jumpers. Some kids are not afforded the agency to decide what they're going to wear. It occurs to me, and I may be wrong in this, but it occurs to me that it's easier perhaps for girls who realize that they're trans boys and begin to identify as a trans boy, because of the fact that the phenomenon of a tomboy is very accepted in society, whereas the concept of a Nancy or a sissy is vilified in society. So it occurs to me that a trans boy could get away with more stuff in terms of gender expression at an early age in elementary school or middle school, but I may be wrong. I may be biased because of the fact that I'm a trans woman.
I would imagine being cis, don't have the health experience, but I definitely experienced seeing my son, who was a tomboy, assigned girl, very much a tomboy from very beginning, ever since he could choose his clothes. So I always, like I said, I had this inkling from very early on. And he was seen as a cool kid, oh, that tomboy, he's cool. And I saw another kid in his class who had long hair and did not identify as anything other, and still now to this day as an adult identifies as male as far as I know. But he was definitely teased. He had long hair. He was kind of goofy. And yeah, I think I imagine that someone like you, Cassie, or you, Melina, who, have the held experience as what you're mentioning, being a assigned boy, but being a girl. Yeah, I think it is our gendered society that makes it harder.
I was sent to an all-boys high school.
Oh, yeah.
I can't imagine that. I didn't deal with this directly because it was right before I got involved, but I do know that, like, my stepson, my trans son, has had quite a bit of difficulties at school in spite of the tomboy factor once he came out as trans. And it was a big enough problem that we've had to change his school several times in the last year that I've known, year and a half really, since I've known them. And it's been difficult for him. There was one school that he transferred into and was attempting to go stealth, and probably would have, but the teachers, or one particular teacher, let what I guess was going through the emergency contact info cards and left it like on the desk, and some other kid happened to notice his particular card with his dead name and gender on it and blurted out, he's a girl. And instantly, like by the end of the day, the entire school knew, and a lot of people were hassling him about it. And there were, kids of both genders who were just whispering basically the same things to him, as they were passing in the hallway. And it just, being as mean little shits, like we are not very good at avoiding training our children to not be.
Oh, and actually that potentially is something that should be really important. It could be a specific campaign to teach all teachers and school administrators that, of course, you must gender correctly. Of course, you must use proper pronouns, but absolutely you mustn't ever out the kid against their will.
I totally agree with that. Positioned at school late in his junior year, and we legally changed his name between junior and senior year of school. That summer we got into court, and his very first day of school as a senior, a teacher that had him as a student teacher, hi, and spits out the dead name. He would have been fine until that happened. But luckily he was able to brush it off. So I can only imagine, Melina, what your son went through.
Yeah, and that was in 8th grade. So it was middle school.
Oh, it's such a rough age.
Yeah, it almost occurs to me that if I was the parent of a trans kid, I would, put together 3x5 cards or get everybody's email address or contact each one of them personally and tell them, okay, look, you out my kid, I break your neck. Said in a nicer way, of course.
Incidentally, this was at a school that had a couple other trans kids there who were out or transitioned where they, in that school. And so it wasn't like the school was unfamiliar with the issues.
Yeah, that's surprising. I mean, some people will just surprise you with their stupidity. I got misgendered by somebody at my trans clinic recently. And I was like, can you please look at the context of the building where you work?
It just, it also, I think, goes to show how ingrained our expectations or our stereotypes are around gender, that our brains have switches that flip without us really being conscious of it. And you would think that someone who worked in a trans clinic would have a little more handle on those switches. But again, not to excuse it, but it's to be aware of it so that we can practice even better. I think those of us who might stumble, sometimes I misgender my child when I'm talking about him when he was little. And, thankfully, because I would feel terrible, it doesn't make him feel dysphoric when I do that, but I wouldn't want to do it on a regular basis because I know that it's just not appropriate for him, and for others too. I don't want others to hear me do it because I don't want them to think that that's a good idea. And again, just because I do groups, and so I try to be also a good example, right? So I feel like it takes a lot of practice, and we need to commit to that practice. And not everyone uses he, she pronouns, right? So then if we get into new pronouns, which is another piece of the discussion we haven't really touched on, but having non-binary or gender non-conforming kids that don't define as male or female, but actually use other pronouns like they and them. There's a lot of debate about that because of the grammatical challenge. And I think, again, it's one of those, like, if you're going to support your child, you need to take that conversation away from them and not intellectualize why they shouldn't use the word they if they've already chosen it. And I know that it can be challenging to our grammar trained ears, but we can adjust. Lots of language evolves, and I think people get stuck because they're not just accepting a word, they're accepting a whole concept around it, which is very difficult for binary people to understand. I think we're trying, but
I have an example that I really like to use to people.
please.
Whenever they say, "Oh, well, now you have the whole them pronoun, and now you have the ze and zir pronoun, and it's so complicated, and who can possibly keep up?" I get that sometimes from people. Who can possibly keep up? And I say, "Honey, this is the way you sound to me when you say that. You sound to me like a typical American that's aware that in Europe there's France and England and Spain and Italy and Germany. And now I'm telling you that there's also Bulgaria and Romania and Slovakia." And your reaction to that is like, well, who can keep up with Europe anymore?
That's a good analogy.
Really good.
I mean, just the fact that you haven't heard about it and there's more subtleties to the subject doesn't mean that you should just scoff at it. And I've received that kind of resistance. My partner is a non-binary, and I use the them pronoun when I refer to them, and I'm very conditioned and very used to doing so. And so sometimes I'm speaking about them to somebody else, and they're like, "Wait, who are you talking about?" And I'm like, "Oh, they use a they pronoun because they're non-binary." And some people say, "Oh, I get it," and it's just the conversation moves on. And sometimes it becomes this strenuous discussion about grammar, which is like, that's not what we're doing now. I'm just telling you about my partner. And it's so strange to me how people can react like that. And the insensitivity is universal, right? I mean, sometimes Asian people experience it when they say, "Hi, my name is Hing Ji," and people are like, "Oh, I don't know how to pronounce that. I'll just call you Adolf, or I'll call you Albert." It's like, "No, my name is Hing Ji." Nobody could pronounce my original last name ever, and I'm like, if you spell it out, it's really, really easy to pronounce. If you just focus for a second and speak it out phonetically, you'll get it. You're just being thick. So it's frustrating how people just refuse to put in the work to validate somebody in front of them with flesh and blood. What are the key things that you've run into? And we've been discussing some of these, but I want to kind of center the conversation a little bit on that, which is, what are the specific things that you've had to push back on in order to create a safe environment for your child?
Not all at once. I've personally had to deal with the other parent who is not accepting. So that's something that I've had to work on, just trying to deal with the every other weekend's visitation with the other child, and I'm talking about my stepkids here. And so this other parent is very not accepting and does everything that he can to undermine all the attempts to transition in any way, and is just an awful person. And so to deal with that, I don't know, I tend to be a calming influence on him, and I just be myself, I guess, a little bit. But I try to be there for him and be somebody that he can talk to. And I don't know, I've argued with the guy at least once in front of them, so that they know that I'm somebody that will stand up for them, both kids. And
that is a fundamental point, by the way, that Melina brings up, which is something that I think is priceless in a kid's life, And I think we forget sometimes that we live in a world where everybody is, well, I mean, I'm 5'3", so that's not so much the case for me, but everybody's about our size or smaller. Everybody is about me size, relatively speaking, or smaller. We don't live in a land of giants, but children live in a land of giants. A child has somebody standing next to them who is their parent, who is 3 times as big as they are. And that giant is talking to somebody else who's 3 times as big as the child is. So to have the parent stand up to a bully and say something is huge in terms of determining the kid's self-esteem. I'm talking about my child. Hold on a second. Somebody's knocking at the door. I'll be right back. Go ahead.
Does she want us to keep talking?
Yes, I think
By
we
all
should.
means.
So,
Okay.
yeah, for me, I mean, I am definitely always concerned for safety, even though my child, does easily get gendered the way he wants to be gendered. I do always have that little piece of me that says, oh my gosh, you know, you just never know. And there's plenty of stories out there about trans men having issues with violence, but of course, it does not nearly compare to what we know for trans women's risks. So, I just think the more we can educate, the more we can spread the word. And I think it's important that cisgender people do that, not just transgender people, because, for me, it should never be the victims or the marginalized person's responsibility to educate everybody, because that's just more exhausting. So I feel, well, if I have a microphone, I would like to use it and say that trans women of color are of many different intersections, being the most at risk piece of our entire society for murder. So I don't want to. I don't want to see those statistics go up, and I really want to see them be going to zero, because it's out of misunderstanding and fear and so many held prejudices that are just unnecessary. So you're back, Cassie.
Yeah,
Yeah.
there was something that circled the conversation that I wanted to bring up, which is, and I'm trying to extrapolate a personal experience, which I belong to a group of friends. I belong to a sex positive community here in Los Angeles, with whom we have often we have gatherings and we have conversations and discussions. And I started dreading going to those gatherings because of the fact that in a 2-hour event, I would have a lot of positive experiences, but invariably at some point of the night, somebody would misgender me. Invariably. And it got to the point where I was going there and I was spending my 2 hours not enjoying the moment until somebody misgenders me, but I was spending the 2 hours on pins and needles waiting for the aggression. And so it got to the point where it was just no point in going anymore. And when I expressed this to some friends in that group, they asked me, what can I do to support you and what can I do to make it better for you? And I said, I find it very awkward to center the conversation on me and to draw attention to myself and to say that somebody else must talk to me a particular way because it sounds bitchy and demanding and self-centered. So I would really appreciate it if somebody else could take that on. And that worked like a charm. It's so wonderful, the fact that somebody would say he around me, and immediately one of my girls would jump up and say, excuse me, and I wouldn't have to say a word. And so that's something that I strongly recommend, building that kind of support for your kid, where they have angels around them who are like, no, that's not going to be tolerated. Would be really, and to have a circle of friends, for each kid to have a circle of friends, a posse, would be really useful. Somebody is asking, because of the fact that a couple of you are raising trans boys, uh, what are the specific effects of in terms of mood swings and in terms of um, emotion, mood swings especially, how do the hormones manifest themselves? And is there anything that you need to watch out for in terms of that? And what triggers the mood swings is another question that came up.
And in my case, I found that my son before hormones was very moody and swung up and down, much like me, unfortunately. However, his mood is very evenly keeled now on testosterone. We're not seeing anger. We were afraid that he would have angry outbursts, and no, he seems to be so at peace with himself.
Mm-hmm.
It really has been a miracle for him.
Oh, that's wonderful.
I've heard of similar effects to that across the board for all trans people, to be honest, including my trans men. In my case, I've only heard about it, but it would be similar to that. You know, he was very moody and upset and depressed all the time. And while there's still a certain amount of that, it's not nearly to the same level. The one thing I have seen, because he started testosterone after I met them and got involved, that he's been prescribed testosterone on an every other week basis. And the dip, you know, right before the injection, you know, for like maybe 2 or 3 days before, that's when he's the most volatile.
Mm-hmm.
And as a result of that, I keep, yes?
But we heard this also from a trans male friend of ours that told us before Will gets testosterone. This is my experience. Talk with your endocrinologist. He would experience what you just said your stepson experiences. A friend recommended once a week. Take half the dose once a week, and we're not seeing those dips.
And I'm totally on board with that, and I've suggested that more than once to the endo, and their response both times has just been to increase the dose rather than increase the frequency. And I think we're at the point where we're going to insist on it, but that, of course, still needs to happen. I've also suggested it to my partner, who's been on testosterone for less time, but, you know, like 4 months now. And they have, I think, gone to every week. But they've definitely not had the same dip type feelings. But yeah, I very much work on suggesting that. It just, the endo has not yet agreed to it.
Well, that's unfortunate.
Yeah, my son does every week, and the dips were really hard. And he's over 18, so I'm like, my hands were out of it at some point because he was able to just talk to his nurse practitioner. That's who we work with. And, you know, that person is seen, you know, has an endocrinologist overseeing him, but the nurse practitioner is the one who's in charge of my son's care and kind of has treated him more as an adult even since the 16-year-old came into the office. He was almost 17. And yeah, the every other week was really bad. The dips, he was exhausted, depressed again. And I think that some of the endocrinologists are cautious to the point of being outdated. You know, they really don't know that there are new protocols happening. And the thing that's challenging is there is no real long-term study on using the hormones, you know, in young children. We do have it for puberty blockers when we look at precocious puberty. I don't mean young children because we don't use hormones with young children, but I'm saying with children under 18 is what I really mean to say. There's just not a lot of evidence. So some endocrinologists are really slow on the, you know, the willingness to go outside maybe the conservative parameters. A great reference is UCSF Gender Center. Stephen Rosenthal there, the endocrinologist there, has a lot of progressive thinking around it. So, I mean, I know you live in Florida, but it might be something interesting just to reach out and kind of get another conversation going around it. It might be interesting to hear what someone else has to say.
Oh, yes,
No.
absolutely. Yes. By the way, I've built in my head a succession of points that I wanted to discuss. One of them is the fact that, and I forget who made this point to me, but it's a great scale. And the scale goes like this. Tolerance. Tolerance is not the same as acceptance. Acceptance is not the same as affirmation. Affirmation and inclusion are different, and then there's celebration. And so one of the reasons why I'm absolutely in love with my partner is because they celebrate me. There is no, and my roommate said it really well recently because the word tolerance came up, and my roommate gave this disgusted look and said, "Tolerance is an awful word. I tolerate cats." So that's an important point I want to get across to parents everywhere. Check yourself. To what extent are you loving your child, or are you tolerating your child? To what extent are you affirming, including, or celebrating your child? In other words, if you have a trans girl, have you bought her a new bra? Have you bought her a dress? Have you brought her to the makeup aisle at Target or Macy's and let her pick something? Because that's what you would be doing with a cis girl. And if you're not doing it with a trans girl, you're absolutely 100% removing validity from her identity. And if you disregard boy gender behavior or boy preferences for the trans boy, you're absolutely denying their identity. My partner mentioned to me that there was a point when they no longer wanted to wear blouses and they just wanted to wear t-shirts, and their mother fought them tooth and nail, and they ended up wearing these kind of bland white blouses which looked ridiculous, and people just thought that she was a girl with a bad sense of style instead of the non-binary person they were trying to identify with. So just I would say be careful and find out if you're being supportive or if you're just being tolerant in the way that you would be tolerant of, I'm thinking of really uncharitable examples, but the way that I'm tolerant of the trash because I'm too lazy to take it out. I realize that it needs to be taken out, but I'm tolerating it. So that's one point I want to discuss. The next thing that I wanted to, and I'm sorry, I wanted to also throw that around the room. Does anybody have something to add to that? Okay, good, because I have another point. Go ahead.
I said I took my daughter to Avon, and a wonderful lady taught my daughter how to do makeup, and she just had the most beautiful way of doing it, and constantly used she and her, and used the proper name with my daughter. The whole session was just very magical. She did both of us together, so it was a nice bonding experience.
Oh, very good. Yeah, and those little things are so hugely important for somebody for a kid who's trying to affirm something about themselves, for the parents to indicate that they're aware and they're listening and they're paying attention. The point I wanted to bring up next is genitalia.
Hang on, I did have one extra thought on that. I mean, I know we are focusing mainly on younger kids, but this really does apply, you know, everything you just said about doing those things with your trans kid applies even if your kids are adults or even older adults in their 30s even. Go and have that experience that you didn't do when they were younger.
Oh, I like that. Yeah.
Very important.
Better late than never. I recently spoke with Sally Goldner, who experienced her bar mitzvah when she was 13, and it caused her great distress. And recently, at 50-something, she had a bat mitzvah, and it brought her a lot of peace. Um, I wanted to bring up body parts and genitalia, and how do you negotiate dysphoria around that as your kid starts to transition into tries to move into puberty? Have you had discussions with your children about that? Have you had discussions about body shape, body parts, or how can they negotiate their body? Jenna.
Yeah.
Jenna's wrestling with her phone. I don't know
Yes.
what's gonna
Sorry
win.
about that. I am here. So I think the phone is and I are winning together. So yeah, well, you know, it's always a tricky conversation, but since we are understanding that I've been given permission to talk about this by my son, you know, so I think there's things that I can talk about my own experience. And then when we're talking about adult children, which two of the three of us have, I think is that right? That we
Melina?
have, Melina's is under 18, but Tina, right? Are
He's
yours?
he's 16.
Yes, mine are
Oh,
both adults.
yeah, exactly. So I feel like to talk about what's under their clothes is a little bit of a sensitive thing, but I have been given permission to do that. And it was very clear in puberty that that was a major, major cause of distress was my child's growing breasts. And he did everything he could to hide them. He used binders. He pushed them down and aside. He hid them with his posture and his clothing layers, many, many layers, no matter how hot it was. It was very difficult. And constantly checking his look, not even being able to go out to take the garbage out without a binder on. So, kind of similar to what was being described, like not being able to see in the mirror. And so, thankfully, we had the wherewithal to find doctors that would support people under 18 at the time. It was not as common as it is now, though we were not the pioneers in the state for getting insurance to cover under 18 surgeries for transgender gender assignment or gender confirmation or affirmation surgeries, depending on the word you use. But we were very grateful that he was able to have top surgery, so the removal of breasts and a reconstructed male chest when he was 16. And that greatly increased his mental and emotional and social well-being and his physical health. He didn't have to wear binders anymore. He was able to breathe. He was able to go outside. You know, before he wore his, when he was wearing his binders, like he was bound in so many ways. Yeah. And I saw freedom, like a uplifting of his chest and his eyes wide open. And he says he's complete for now, and so isn't looking at genital surgery at all. And as far as that goes, I find it's his private body. We certainly talked about it when he was younger, but now I've been, you know, told that he's complete for now, and I feel like it's his business, and he also knows the door's open if he needs to talk about it.
That's wonderful, and I totally agree with you. Especially as they become adults, it gets awkward to have that conversation, to have any kind of conversations like that. But I was more referring to as at the situation where your child is just becoming socialized and on their first year of elementary school or preschool, and then again throughout puberty. One point I wanted to convey that I think it can be really helpful is to have a discussion about nomenclature and to mutually come up with languaging that's not dysphoria triggering. One example of what I mean is it can be very dysphoria triggering for a trans woman to refer to testicles. It can be very, very dysphoria triggering for a trans boy to talk about breasts. So one solution that I saw that I think is pretty genius is to refer to them as glands and to use the word glands instead, or to I've heard one family referring to them as bumps. And they talked about, well, when you have your bumps removed, and I understand that you need to cover your bumps, and to specifically avoid the gender term, which would negate their identity, and conversely to also validate their bodies for their aspirational bodies. And for example,
something I've done, at least in terms of my son's chest, is I actually call them his chesticles.
Oh my God.
That's pretty cute. Yeah, I do think that that's important. I think that it's very important for a trans boy that this area of their body is referred to as their chest rather than their breasts.
Yes.
And likewise, it's generally pretty healthy for a
Very
trans
true.
girl, even if she is as flat-chested as an 11-year-old. It's good if the mom says something like your boobs or your breasts instead of saying your chest, because it validates the growing body that they have. It might take a while for the landscape to arrange itself, but I think it's really healthy. It's really, for example, it would be really healthy to have a conversation with a trans boy as they become 12 or 13 as to how they're going to negotiate the whole subject of menstruation and potentially come up with words which are not female gendered, and with languaging that's all their own, so that they don't feel that they have to pander to the wrong gender when that conversation comes up.
Yes, we came up with the term menstruation in our house. It worked really well because nothing else seemed to stop the poor, and they caused the biggest amount of dysphoria, with the exception of his chest.
Mm-hmm.
The chest, he is very happy, but menstruation just kept happening. Testosterone has been a miracle there too.
Mm-hmm. That's very good. I had more points to bring up, but I've forgotten them at the moment. My mind went blank. The reason why I keep Dory up there is because she's a symbol for me, because I am very absent-minded on my attention waivers. So does anybody else want to bring up a subject for us to discuss? I can also pick here from the chat because somebody wrote, yeah, that it's sometimes it's just as simple as asking yourself, how often have you said "I love you" to your child in a particular day? Janna, what are the things that you find in group that parents are having hesitancy or uncertainty with?
Yeah. Whew. Well, it really varies. It depends on the age of the child, I think. When the children are very young, we're really only talking about, if we're talking about transition at all, we're talking about a social transition. But even before that, I think with the very kids who are very young, the parents come with the concern of, we all feel this, probably not wanting to do the wrong thing. But also with the young children, there's such a heightened awareness now. Like, I think when I had my younger child, I had awareness, but it wasn't as heightened as it is now. There was no puberty blockers introduced yet when my kid was young. So I didn't have this question in my mind: when should I do the blockers? When should I do the blockers? Should I do the blockers? When should I do the blockers? And people are really heightened about that. And, almost feel like they have to do the blockers because then they don't want their child to go through the wrong puberty. And there's also complications with not going through puberty and then having surgeries after with parts that haven't actually matured. So they're having to, adjust. It's not a simple answer, right? So because this working with people under a certain age is so new, especially allowing very young children to transition is so new, relatively in our world, it just, parents come with just a lot of feeling of pressure from that.
Oh, you broke up a little bit. I heard the sentence, but then at the end it broke up, and now she froze. Yeah, her image froze. Tina, I have a question specifically about your trans daughter, but more widely also, it could be a question for the rest of the room about their trans kids in general. But I'm curious about dating, and I'm curious about the apprehensions and the protocols that you had to set up as your child started joining the dating world.
So she seems to have taken care of that aspect of her life on her own. She is involved with 4 different transgender people at the same time. They're all aware of each other. It's a polyamorous type relationship.
Polyamorous.
Okay, polyamorous. Yeah, I'm still learning. There's so much I have yet to learn, and I'm glad that they are willing to teach me. Yeah, I haven't had to discuss with her how to be safe, how to, how do you know when it's time to tell somebody that you're dating, and how to be safe about that. Already involved with people who are transgender, and obviously the topic already had come up.
Yeah, and I think that probably would be a good topic to discuss for a second, which is disclosure. Disclosure is a very highly charged topic for trans women and for trans men as well. In my opinion, I think that there are 2 or 3 protocols which are hugely important in the dating world for trans people. The first one is to put yourself in dating situations which are LGBTQI friendly to begin with, and
Yes.
to avoid as much as possible situations which are cis heterocentric to the point of trans exclusion. And I'm not saying that it always has to be at the LGBT center and it always has to be under a big rainbow flag, but I'm saying that it's good to kind of check the room and to make sure that you have allies and that you have context and that it's not a transphobic or homophobic environment. So that's number 1, because then the next step will become easier, which is the second one. I strongly recommend having conversations about disclosure very, very early in the game, because the more that people bond, the more that people become invested in each other, the harder it is to have such a conversation. Would you gals agree with me on that?
Oh, definitely. I mean, I've thought about it more from the sake of as an adult than teaching a kid who's still in school. In terms of my kids, I'm dealing more with trying to help teach them how to cope with the periods in between dating when they don't have somebody to date, because that seems to be a lot more traumatic. They feel a lot more lonely in various ways, or dealing with child-centered things like jealousy that is a lot more volatile at that age compared to after you've been dating for a number of years. As an adult, recommended, what I've suggested to others, once you're in the adult world, like if you were, for instance, asked somebody on a date, first date, just go and enjoy the first date. And then on the second one, that's the second date, if you're inclined to even have a second date, and they are too, that's the one to really delve into who this person is and what is the likelihood, what are they likely to react to the knowledge of, coming out. And if by the end of that second date you feel that this person is not going to react well, just cut it off and don't date them anymore. But if you think they might, you know, at the very end of the date, I think that's the perfect time to tell them, because then you can say, okay, this is me. These are my, these are my concerns. This is what I'm worried about. This is me. I hope to hear from you again. And then kind of leave it on them to call you or to make some attempt at further communication. So hopefully there's a third date at that point. That's my suggestion.
Yeah, I like it. I like it. I definitely think that before any kind of physical connection escalates too much, it's important to have the conversation, because people can be really, really weird about this. There are some people who are pansexual and could care less about what body parts somebody might have, and then there are people who are pretty specific with their tastes and who can react very, very adversely to it. So recently somebody said that sex is a little bit like Coldplay, the band, which is you either hate it or you love it. There's no in between. So I think it's important for your safety to have the conversation early. Did you have any apprehensions as your daughter started dating, Tina?
I'm mostly just worried about having her heart broken. We'll tell my kids again and again, it's worth that risk.
By the way, Janna has lost her phone connection. Her phone died, so she's texting me from her laptop now. So she is still with us and she's listening to us. She just can't participate.
Okay.
Sorry, go ahead.
Worth the risk of a heartbreak to be able to find that someone that just makes you feel such joy in life. And it may take several heartbreaks to get there. I was having this conversation with my son in the car the other day. He had a terribly painful breakup right after he came out in a relationship. And she couldn't see herself with a partner who's becoming male. And it ended. And he still is recovering from that relationship. It was 4 years long. It was very long. It went all through puberty. So integral part is, in fact, had saved his life several times, calling us in the middle of the night, hey, you need to go check your son, he's going to hurt himself. It was a wonderful person in his life, but the relationship had come to its natural end, and he's just now facing the dating world. And it's neat to see him doing that, and now we're starting to talk about, well, how do you someone you are.
There's something else that occurs to me to surface as you talked about this, which is in relation to the peripheral subjects of transition. There are things that happen throughout the child's day in relation to bullying, in relation to relationships, to friendships, to dating, to liking somebody, to interactions with their friends, all of which can be very fraught with emotion. And if the parent is, and I'm going back to my earlier point, tolerant, quote unquote, about the child, but not really embracing of the child's transition, then all that kind of conversation gets very limited, and the child would not feel safe expressing to you when they have a heartbreak, when they have a pain, when they have a fear, and that can lead to a lot of isolation on the part of the child. So it's very important that you make it very clear to the child that you are on board and that you do embrace them, because otherwise all these other very important conversations, which are vital for a parent and a child to have, would not happen, right, Tina?
I was just so thrilled that he's finally opening up,
Mm-hmm.
ready to work through the pain that he had. We knew it was extremely painful, and we just let him take his time in being able to process this.
Mm-hmm. Somebody wrote in the chat, thank you for hosting this wonderful summit. Happy National Coming Out Day. Today is National Coming
It
Out Day.
is.
So to all the trans kids watching this, talk to your parents and come out wherever you are. We're getting close to the time that we have
Exactly.
to wrap up, and I'd like to ask you all, and this goes to Janna as well, who's listening to us and able to chat with us, and to Katrina, who's been participating through the chat. If there are any other things that we should talk about before we wrap up.
It's important to be open, to listen to your child, to really, really listen. That if you're feeling that this is hard for you as a parent, think about how hard this is for your child. Find somebody to be your support. Find someone to talk to. Find someone to share your grief with, so your child doesn't have to see that with you.
Oh, well, that's a fundamental point, and I'm so glad that you bring it up, Tina. Concentric circles of support. Concentric circles of support. You support your child. Your trans child is not there to support you about supporting them. That breaks
Right.
it falls down in and of itself. You can't build it like that. So you support your child. You find somebody else to support you through the experience. And incidentally, something that was shared with me recently by somebody who transitioned early in life is that their mother did something really, really wise, which is their mother found a trans woman, befriended her, and asked the trans woman, the grown adult trans woman, a whole bunch of awkward and incisive and personal questions instead of asking these questions of the child. So that's another really good hack, which is get your questions answered elsewhere and come to your child with answers. Don't question your child. Melina, anything else that you think we should be adding?
I'm sure there's something, but I have limited experience parenting trans kids. I have a lot more experience parenting kids, but not so much trans kids. I'm doing my best to, since in a way I was once a trans kid, but at the moment I can't really see anything other than,
and actually, potentially that would be a point to surface, which is all of us are speaking from our shared experiences, and we're not saying that we're experts, and we're not saying that we're PhDs on the subject. So take everything that we said with a grain of salt. I hope that it helped. I hope it was constructive. Get inquisitive, get a lot more information, participate in support groups. I want to give a shout out to an organization that Janna is part of that I'm sure she would want me to mention, which is Ally Moms. Ally Moms is a wonderful organization. Not only do they support other parents who are parenting a trans kid, but Ally Moms actually is there for any trans child, any trans teenager who has been rejected by their family and has nobody to call. If they want to talk to a mom, they can call Ally Moms, and somebody will give them mom advice. Somebody will lend a friendly ear as a mom to them. So if you're a trans kid and you're on the run, if you're homeless, if you run away from home and you're listening to this from your phone, think of Ally Moms as a resource and give them a call, because even if it's just because it's Thanksgiving and you want to talk to a mom, you have somebody to call.
The only thing, it is. The only thing I can think of to add is I don't know how related it is, but anyway, I just got a note. Yeah, some of us may encounter as parents other parents or even non-parents who may go off on the idea of, it being a choice, and all of us know it isn't. But a response I keep thinking of and use on occasion is fire back at them. It's like, you know what? What if it was a choice? So what? So what? I mean, even if it was a choice to transition, even if it was a choice to be trans, so what? They should still be supported. It doesn't matter whether it's a choice or not. It isn't, but it doesn't matter if it was.
Yeah, that's pretty profound, actually.
Very true.
I spoke recently with Professor Robert Sapolsky of Stanford University. He's a neurobiologist there, and he was emphasizing that studies have been done in the transgender brain to indicate that the brain of a trans woman closely resembles the brain of a cis woman. The brain of a trans man closely resembles the brain of a cis man and not that of a woman. And he said that when there's a misalignment between body and brain, trust the brain.
Right.
And so to that, I would say, and this is kind of one of those topics that could be argued forever. I'm going to give my own take. Being transgender is not a choice. Being transgender is something that you're born with, something that you carry, and something that can make your life very difficult and complicated. It can also give you a wealth of experience that I wish that cisgender people would tap into, because we know things. We understand the genders in ways that cis people don't. But transitioning is a choice. Deciding when to transition, how to transition is a choice. It's hardly a choice in the sense that quite often the alternative is suicide. It is hardly a choice in the fact that the alternative quite often is misery. But to the extent that we have agency over that, that is a choice. But I just want to emphasize that it's a very hard choice. And again, I have these analogies or these parallels to cancer, which I'm really hoping are not going to be seen as presumptuous. But one parallel that comes up to me is that if you see your kid just randomly deciding to apply radiation and chemotherapy, you would think that they're nuts. Because who would do that to themselves for no reason, just as a lark? But if you become a little bit more aware, and then you realize that there's actually been a condition and that this person has been diagnosed with a life-threatening illness, and now they're fighting it with chemotherapy and radiation, in that context, the action makes perfect sense because it's an effort to stay alive. And that's the way I would like for most people to understand transition, which is, this is our effort to stay alive. This is our effort to build a life that we can live with.
In the case of my son, this was very, very true.
Mm-hmm.
He had to transition to male, or we would have been burying our female child. It just was that plain and simple. Mm-hmm. And then our daughter, when she transitioned, it was completely the opposite. She doesn't have, so to speak. She says, the only thing that bothers me about my body, Mom, was that my chest wasn't right. I was lacking breasts, but I don't like the hair. That's her biggest issue, is her facial hair. Mm-hmm. So two very different children, two very different experiences, but a whole lot of insight into how I can help support anybody else that we ever meet that is transgender, that is going through this as a parent or as a person themselves.
Mm-hmm. I really like a parallel from the movie Scent of a Woman, where Al Pacino is training a very young, what's his name? Chris McDonald, on how to interact with a blind person. Chris McDonald grabs him by the arm And Al Pacino. Oh, there's a really big booming voice, booming noise now coming from somewhere. I don't know where that noise is coming from. But anyway, Al Pacino rejects Chris O'Donnell's trying to grab his arm, and he says, "You don't grab me. I hold on to you." And I really like to use that metaphor for trans kids, which is let your kid hold on to you. Don't grab and jostle your kid in one direction or another. And the example over how dysphoria manifests itself on, or the different adjustments that a kid needs to make to their body as it grows in order to satisfy their sense of self and in order to assuage dysphoria is entirely up to the individual, and it's not to be dictated by trying to appease anybody or trying to match society's expectations or try to affirm or prove anything to anybody. You need vaginoplasty if you are really triggered by having male genitalia down there or having genitalia that doesn't align with your expectations. You don't need it if you're perfectly fine with it. Why would you have invasive surgery if you're comfortable with that body part being what it is? And it's not, it should never be some kind of a badge in order to belong or not belong to a club of sorts. But I'm going on a little bit of a tirade now.
And one last point to make. If a transgender person chooses not to have genital surgery, that does not make them any less transgender.
Yes, that's what I was
else.
going for. Yeah, very well put, and much more succinct than my rambling rant. On that note, we're going to wrap up. We've been talking about children, and I have to go pick up my own kid at Boys and Girls Club, so I'm going to run off. But this has been a delightful conversation. I really appreciate that you joined me. Janna, thank you so much. And we missed you at the ending of the conversation, but we really appreciate all your input. Janna Barkin, by the way, wrote a book entitled He's Always Been My Son. And that's available in bookstores everywhere. And Tina and Melina are both active online, right? And how do we find you two ladies online?
Yes. I'm on Facebook.
Mm-hmm.
A great big support group of parents. It's called Parents of Transgender Children.
Mm-hmm.
And I also run a transgender support group for 40 and older. That one is called Transgender Women 40 Plus Support Family.
Wonderful. And Melina, how do we find you online?
Yeah, I'm very active. I'm more active on the political side of things, but you can find me, my activism page on Facebook, which is at Activist Melina. I am co-leader of a group called Trans Rights Action Committee of North Central Florida. But my partner heads up a local group here in Florida called Tranquility. You can also go to my website, which is connected to my activism, which is melinareyna.org. And if you can, listen to, read my activism in general. And if you could support my activism on Patreon, which is patreon.com/melinareyna. And Melina is Melina. Reyna is Rayna.
Perfect. And Janna Barkin has a website which is called he'salwaysbeenmyson.com. Also, if you just search for Janna Barkin, she comes up all over Google. And she's on Facebook as Janna Barkin Yoga. She's also on Huffington Post. And with that, we're going to wrap up. I do have to run off. You ladies have been wonderful. Thank you so much for your participation. This has been another session of the Empowered Trans Woman Summit.
Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you. Bye.